The Vanishing Groom. The grand ballroom of the Lexington Hotel glowed with the brilliance of 1,000 tiny chandeliers, their golden light reflecting off the crystal glasses and the polished marble floor. Every table was adorned with cascading white roses, their delicate fragrance mingling with the scent of aged champagne and the promise of a night to remember. The string quartet played a soft, elegant melody, underscoring the quiet murmurs of elegantly dressed guests waiting in anticipation for the ceremony to begin. Kara Thompson stood in front of an ornate full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The ivory lace gown fit her like a second skin, its intricate details a perfect combination of elegance and modern sophistication. Her dark curls had been pinned back, delicate pearls woven into the strands like tiny drops of moonlight. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, the day she married Damian Hayes, the man who had captured her heart and promised her forever. But something was wrong. A knot of unease twisted in her stomach, growing with every passing second. The guests had arrived. The wedding procession was in place. Everything was perfect, except the groom was nowhere to be seen. Kara's best friend and maid of honor, Olivia Monroe, entered the bridal suite, her usually sharp and confident expression laced with concern. She held her phone tightly, as if it carried a secret too heavy to share. "Kara," Olivia said softly, stepping closer. "He's not here." A chill ran down Kara's spine. "What do you mean, he's not here?" "Maybe he's just. His best man is looking for him, but no one's seen him in over an hour," Olivia interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "His phone is off." Kara's fingers tightened around her bouquet, the once soft petals now feeling like thorns against her palm. Damian wouldn't do this to her. He loved her. He had spent months planning this wedding, promising her that they were going to build a life together. He wouldn't just disappear. Would he? She turned sharply, heading for the door, but Olivia grabbed her wrist. "Kara, wait. I need to see for myself," Kara said, her voice trembling but firm. He wouldn't just leave. Would he? The grand hall fell into a tense silence as Kara stepped into the doorway, her presence commanding attention even as her heart threatened to shatter. The murmurs started immediately, hushed voices whispering speculations behind raised champagne glasses. The string quartet trailed off, their music dissolving into nothingness. At the far end of the room, Damian's mother, Eleanor Hayes, stood with an air of quiet authority. Always impeccably dressed, she looked more composed than a mother who had just lost her son-in-law-to-be should have been. She held a single white envelope between her fingers. Kara didn't have to ask. She already knew. Her legs felt heavy as she walked toward Eleanor, every step an eternity. She reached for the envelope with shaking hands, the pristine paper cold against her fingertips. She swallowed hard and forced herself to read. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." That was it. No explanation. No grand declaration. No farewell. Just 6 words that shattered everything. Kara stared at the note, unblinking. The room around her spun, the voices of the guests a deafening hum pressing against her skull. She had built a life with Damian, had trusted him, had loved him with every part of her soul. And in return, he had left her standing alone, abandoned in front of hundreds of people. Her fingers clenched around the paper, crushing it in her fist. The silence in the room was suffocating. Everyone was watching, waiting for her to break. She refused. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and turned to face the crowd. She willed her voice to remain steady, though her heart was breaking with every word. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her tone even controlled. "There will be no wedding today." A single tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She wouldn't give Damian, or anyone else, the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. With that, she handed the bouquet to Olivia and walked away. The cold New York air hit her like a slap as she stepped outside the hotel. The streets were alive with the usual hum of the city, horns blaring, people laughing, the scent of hot pretzels, and coffee mingling in the crisp autumn breeze. But Kara barely noticed any of it. She climbed into the sleek black limousine that was supposed to take her and Damien away as husband and wife. Instead, she sat alone, staring at the city lights through tear-blurred eyes. She had spent years believing in Damien, believing in the future they were building together. Now that future was gone. A sob built in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She had spent too many years proving herself, proving that she belonged in the world of polished smiles and whispered judgments. She wouldn't let Damien destroy her. No, he may have walked away from her, but she refused to let him take her strength with him. The days that followed were a blur of silence, unanswered calls, and a growing numbness that settled into Kara's bones. The media had gotten hold of the story within hours, plastering headlines across the internet. Runaway groom. The billionaire heir who left his bride at the altar. Reporters camped outside her apartment, eager for a quote, a reaction, something they could use to spin their narrative. She ignored them all, choosing instead to lose herself in work. As a high-profile attorney, she had spent years fighting battles for others. Now she needed to fight for herself. But even as she buried herself in cases, a single question haunted her. Why? Why had Damien run? What had been so terrifying that he had chosen to abandon everything rather than face it? And more importantly, would she ever get the answers? Weeks later, Kara sat in her office, flipping through case files, when Olivia stormed in, her face a mask of determination. "You need to see this," she said, slamming her phone onto the desk. Kara hesitated before picking it up. A news article flashed across the screen. Damien Hayes spotted abroad. Mysterious disappearance raises more questions. The photo accompanying the headline sent a fresh wave of nausea through Kara. Damien, sitting at an outdoor cafe in Paris, laughing, like nothing had ever happened. Her blood ran cold. So he hadn't disappeared because of a family emergency. He hadn't been in an accident. He hadn't lost his mind in some inexplicable tragedy. He had simply chosen to walk away. He had abandoned her. And then, as if the universe wasn't cruel enough, another piece of news arrived. She was late. 2 weeks late. Her pulse pounded as she did the math in her head, dread pooling in her stomach. No, it wasn't possible. But deep down, she already knew. Damien hadn't just left her behind. He had left something far more important, a life growing inside of her. And now, she had a choice to make. A choice that would change everything. A secret too big to hide. The pregnancy test lay on the bathroom counter, its tiny screen flashing the truth she wasn't ready to face. Positive. Kara gripped the cold marble sink, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The luxurious penthouse apartment she had once shared with Damien felt like a prison now, its floor-to-ceiling windows exposing her vulnerability to the sprawling New York skyline. Her mind reeled, replaying every moment from the past few weeks. The nausea, the exhaustion, the strange cravings that she had chalked up to stress. But it wasn't stress, it wasn't grief. It was life. A life growing inside her. Damien's child. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. She needed to call Olivia. She needed someone to tell her this wasn't real, that it was some cruel joke, that the test was faulty. But deep down, she knew the truth. A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Olivia's voice filtered through. "Kara, open up, it's me." Kara hesitated for only a second before unlocking the door. Olivia stepped in, her sharp green eyes immediately scanning the room before landing on the pregnancy test. She froze. "Oh, hell no." Kara swallowed hard. "Liv, Olivia grabbed the test, her face contorting into a mix of disbelief and rage. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." Kara sank onto the edge of the bathtub, her head in her hands. "It is." A long silence stretched between them before Olivia exhaled sharply and crouched in front of her. "Okay," she said, her voice softer now. "Breathe. We'll figure this out." Kara lifted her head. What is there to figure out? Damien abandoned me. And now I'm pregnant with his child. Olivia scoffed. Correction. You're pregnant with a future world leader, genius, or badass lawyer who will take over the world. Damien is irrelevant. Kara let out a hollow laugh. If only it were that simple. Olivia sat back on her heels. So, are you gonna tell him? Kara's stomach twisted. No. Olivia blinked. No. Kara shook her head, determination settling into her bones. He made his choice. Live. He walked away from me, from our future, without a word. He doesn't deserve to know. Olivia sighed, rubbing her temples. I want to argue, but damn it, I get it. That man doesn't deserve to waltz back in after what he did. Silence stretched between them, the weight of reality pressing down. Finally, Olivia clapped her hands together. All right, here's what we're gonna do. First, we're getting you an appointment with an OB-GYN. Second, we're getting you real food, because I know you haven't eaten anything besides coffee and misplaced revenge for 3 weeks. Kara let out a small smile. And third, Olivia grinned, we're going to plan how you're going to dominate motherhood like the badass you are. For the first time since the wedding disaster, Kara felt something other than anger or grief. Hope. Even if Damien was gone, she wasn't alone. 6 months later, Kara adjusted her black maternity dress, the fabric stretching over her growing belly as she stepped into the conference room. The partners at Sinclair & Myers, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country, sat at the long oak table, their expressions unreadable. She knew they were waiting for her decision. Would she take the senior partner offer, or would she step back, given the circumstances? Kara cleared her throat, ignoring the weight of their gazes. My answer is yes, she said firmly. A murmur of approval spread through the room, but one of the older partners leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Are you sure, Ms. Thompson? A child is a full-time commitment. Are you prepared to balance both? Kara met his gaze without hesitation. I've been balancing high-stakes cases and courtroom battles for years. I assure you, raising a child will not make me any less capable. The room fell silent. Then, to her surprise, the managing partner, Richard Myers, nodded. Well said. Congratulations, Miss Thompson. A slow smile spread across Kara's face. She had won another battle. She would build a future for her child, with or without Damien. 3 years later, the laughter of children filled the small park as autumn leaves drifted lazily from the trees. Kara sat on a bench, sipping her coffee, watching her son Leo chase a group of pigeons across the grass. He had Damien's dark hair, but her sharp eyes. His curiosity knew no bounds, and his determination rivaled her own. Mommy, look, Leo called, holding up a leaf shaped like a star. Kara smiled. That's a good one, baby. She had done it. 3 years of juggling a demanding career in motherhood. 3 years of proving she didn't need Damien or his fortune. She was happy. Until the past came crashing back. Kara. The voice sent an electric shock through her system. Slowly, she turned. Damien Hayes stood a few feet away, looking exactly as he had the day he left. Except now, there was something different in his eyes. Shock. His gaze flickered between her and Leo. Kara's pulse pounded. Then, Damien spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Is he mine? She had spent 3 years preparing for every scenario, every challenge, every obstacle. But nothing could have prepared her for this moment, for facing the man who had once destroyed her, and for deciding whether he would ever get the chance to know the child he never knew existed. The moment of reckoning. The air in the small park seemed to still, as if time itself had frozen around them. The sound of children laughing, the rustling of leaves in the cool autumn breeze, none of it reached Kara's ears. All she could hear was the rapid pounding of her heart. All she could see was Damien Hayes standing just feet away from her, his piercing blue eyes locked onto Leo, her son. Kara's fingers tightened around the coffee cup in her hands. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in her nightmares, in fleeting, anxious thoughts that came and went over the past 3 years. But she had never expected it to happen like this. Is he mine? Damien's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. It took everything in Kara not to react, not to let the storm of emotions raging inside her show on her face. How dare he? How dare he stand here? After 3 years, after leaving her at the altar with nothing but a 6-word note, and now demand answers. Kara. His voice was softer now, almost pleading. She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced her expression to remain calm. What are you doing here, Damien? He blinked, seemingly caught off guard by her composed response. He exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. I just got back from Europe last week. I was meeting an old friend for coffee nearby. And then I saw you. His voice trailed off as his gaze flickered back to Leo, who was still playing, oblivious to the tension between the adults. Damien's jaw tightened. Tell me the truth, Kara. Is he mine? Kara took a slow breath, weighing her options. She could lie. She could tell him no, walk away, and pretend this moment never happened. But she had never been a coward. Yes. The single word landed like a bomb between them. Damien flinched as if struck, his breath hitching. His entire posture changed, his shoulders stiffening, his fists clenching at his sides. You've never told me. His voice was strained, his eyes filled with something between anger and regret. You never asked, Kara shot back, her voice cold and sharp. He shook his head in disbelief. I didn't know. I would have. You would have what, Damien? Kara cut in, standing up from the bench, her voice rising with frustration. You would have come back, fought for us. She scoffed, shaking her head. You left me at the altar. You disappeared. You didn't even have the decency to tell me to my face. You don't get to walk back in now and act like you would have done something different. Damien opened his mouth, then closed it again, his face pale. Mommy, who's that? Kara's breath caught as Leo suddenly appeared at her side, his small hand tugging at her coat. His bright eyes looked up at Damien with curiosity, unaware of the gravity of the moment. She forced herself to smile down at her son. Just someone I used to know, sweetheart. Damien visibly recoiled at the words. His eyes darted between Kara and Leo, and for the first time, he looked truly shaken. Kara placed a protective hand on Leo's shoulder. Come on, baby, let's go home. She turned to leave, but Damien's voice stopped her. Kara, please, just talk to me. She hesitated, her body tense. There was so much she wanted to say, so much she wanted to scream at him, but not here, not in front of Leo. She exhaled sharply and looked at Damien over her shoulder. Tomorrow, my office, 10 a.m. Then, without another word, she took Leo's hand and walked away. The confrontation. The next morning, Kara sat behind her large mahogany desk, staring at the clock. 9:58 a.m. She hated that she was waiting for him, hated that, despite everything, her pulse quickened with nerves. Then, at exactly 10 a.m., the door to her office opened. Damien Hayes walked in. He looked different from the man she once loved. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, a weariness in the way he carried himself. He wore a tailored navy blue suit, but his usual effortless confidence was missing. Kara, he started, but she held up a hand. Sit. He hesitated, then sank into the chair across from her. She folded her hands on the desk, leveling him with a steady gaze. You have 5 minutes to explain why you left. After that, I decide whether or not you have any place in Leo's life. Damien's throat bobbed as he swallowed. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but you need to know the truth. Kara arched a brow. Then start talking. He exhaled and ran a hand down his face. That night, the night before the wedding, I got a call from my father. Kara frowned. Your father. Damien nodded. He gave me an ultimatum. Either I walked away from you, or he would destroy you. Kara's stomach clenched. What are you talking about? My father never approved of you, Kara. You know that. But I didn't realize how far he was willing to go to keep us apart. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. He had dirt on your firm, fabricated evidence of fraud. He was going to leak it to the press, have you disbarred, ruin your career before it even started. Kara's blood ran cold. Damien's voice dropped to a whisper. I had no choice. I left to protect you. For a moment, Kara couldn't breathe. She had spent 3 years hating him, believing he had abandoned her because he was weak, because he didn't love her enough. But this changed everything. Her fingers tightened into fists. You should have told me. I couldn't, Damien said, his voice raw. If I had, you would have fought back, and my father would have followed through with his threats. Kara shook her head, anger boiling inside her. So you made the decision for me. You thought leaving me at the altar was better than trusting me to fight for myself. Damien flinched. I was trying to protect you. Kara let out a bitter laugh. Well, congratulations, Damien. You protected me so well that I had to raise our son alone. His eyes darkened. I should have known. I should have come back sooner. Yes, Kara snapped. You should have. A heavy silence filled the room. Damien took a deep breath. Kara, I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to be in Leo's life. I want to be his father. Kara clenched her jaw. For 3 years, she had been enough. She had built a life for Leo, given him everything. And now Damien wanted to waltz back in. She stood abruptly. I need time to think. Damien's expression tightened, but he nodded. I'll wait for your decision. Kara didn't respond as he walked out the door. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't sure what the right decision was. A battle of choices. The moment Damien walked out of her office, Kara collapsed into her chair, her hands trembling as she pressed her fingers against her temples. She had spent 3 years believing she knew the whole story. That Damien had left because he was weak, selfish, or worse. Because he had never truly loved her. Now, she knew the truth, and she wished she didn't. Her office felt suffocating, the air thick with unresolved emotions. She exhaled sharply, then reached for her phone, dialing the only person who could make sense of this mess. Olivia answered on the second ring. Did you kill him yet? Or do I need to bring a shovel? Kara let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. It's worse. Liv. So much worse. Tell me everything. And so she did. By the time Kara finished, Olivia was silent for a long moment before muttering, That bastard. Kara pinched the bridge of her nose. Which one? Both of them. Olivia snapped. His father for blackmailing you, and Damien for being a colossal idiot. He thought abandoning you was the best option. What kind of fairy tale logic is that? Kara sighed. I don't know, Liv. I don't know what to do. He wants to be in Leo's life. Do you believe him? Olivia asked carefully. Kara hesitated, her fingers tightening around her phone. I think I do. And that was the terrifying part. For all her anger, for all the years she had spent resenting him, Damien hadn't disappeared to run away from responsibility. He had left to protect her. But that didn't change the fact that she had raised Leo alone. That she had been the one who stayed, while Damien had been a ghost in the background. Did she really want to let him back in? Olivia sighed on the other end. Look, you're the strongest woman I know, but you don't have to figure this all out alone. Whatever you decide, I've got your back. Kara smiled faintly. I know. Good. Now, go home and get some sleep before you overthink yourself into oblivion. Kara knew Olivia was right, but sleep was the last thing on her mind. Because for the first time in 3 years, the future was uncertain again, and she hated not knowing what came next. The father-son meeting. 2 days later, Kara found herself standing in front of Damien's penthouse apartment, Leo's small hand curled in hers. She had spent the past 48 hours going back and forth, weighing every possible scenario, every potential risk. But in the end, she had come to a simple truth. Leo deserved to know his father, and she deserved to see whether Damien would live up to his promises or break them all over again. She knocked once. The door swung open almost immediately, and Damien stood there, his eyes flickering between her and Leo. He looked nervous. "Good. Hi," Damien said softly, his gaze lingering on Leo. "Come in." Kara hesitated, then nodded, stepping inside. The apartment was elegant but empty, like a place that belonged to someone who had never truly made it home. Leo's bright eyes wandered across the space, curiosity lighting up his face. "Wow, it's big." Damien smiled, kneeling down to Leo's level. "Yeah, you like it?" Leo nodded, then tilted his head. "Who are you?" Damien inhaled sharply, glancing at Kara. She nodded once, giving him permission. Then Damien turned back to Leo. I'm your dad." Leo frowned. "My dad?" Damien nodded. "Yeah, buddy. I know it's a lot to take in, but I want to get to know you." Leo stared at him for a long moment, then finally asked, "Do you like dinosaurs?" Kara nearly laughed. Damien blinked. Yeah. Dinosaurs are pretty cool." Leo narrowed his eyes, as if assessing his honesty. "Which one's your favorite?" Damien hesitated, then said, "The T-Rex." Leo sighed dramatically. "Everyone picks the T-Rex." Kara smirked, watching as her son completely threw Damien off balance. But then, something surprising happened. Damien leaned in, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. Okay. How about the Ankylosaurus?" Leo's eyes widened. "You know about the Ankylosaurus?" Damien grinned. "Of course. Armored like a tank, tail like a hammer. It's a total powerhouse." Leo considered this, then nodded approvingly. "That's a good choice." And just like that, the first wall between them cracked. Kara watched as Leo began talking excitedly about dinosaurs, and Damien listened intently, nodding at all the right moments. Something inside her twisted. Was this how it was supposed to be? Would things have been different if Damien had stayed? She shook the thought away. The past was done. The only thing that mattered now was the future, an unexpected threat. For the next few weeks, Damien proved himself in ways Kara hadn't expected. He showed up, consistently, without fail. He attended every playdate Kara allowed. He learned Leo's routines, his favorite foods, his bedtime stories. And most importantly, he never pushed too hard. But just as Kara was beginning to believe he might actually stay this time, the past came knocking. Literally. She was leaving her office one evening when a black luxury car pulled up beside her. The back window rolled down, revealing an older man with sharp blue eyes and silver-streaked hair. Damien's father. "Kara." He greeted smoothly, his voice as cold as ever. Kara's entire body went rigid. "What do you want?" Mr. Hayes smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "A simple conversation. I have nothing to say to you." "Then just listen," he said, his tone shifting to something more threatening. "You've built quite the life for yourself. Impressive. Really. A successful career, a bright future. It would be a shame if that were to be complicated." Kara's fists clenched. "Are you threatening me?" Mr. Hayes chuckled. "Not at all. Just stating the facts. My son has always been reckless when it comes to you, but I won't let his mistakes ruin the family's reputation. So here's what I propose." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim envelope. Kara's stomach twisted. $1 million, he said, handing it to her. "You walk away. Take the money, leave town, and cut Damien out of your son's life permanently." Kara stared at the envelope, disgust curling in her stomach. Then, slowly, deliberately, she took it and ripped it in half. Mr. Hayes' expression darkened. Careful, Kara. You don't want to make an enemy of me. Kara smiled, but there was nothing kind about it. I already have. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving the shredded remains of his bride scattered on the pavement. Because this time, no one was taking her choices away from her. Not Damien, and certainly not his father. The battle lines are drawn. Kara's heart pounded as she walked away from the black luxury car, her heels clicking against the pavement in sharp, determined beats. Every nerve in her body was on fire, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Damien's father thought he could buy her off, thought he could control her the way he had controlled Damien. He had no idea who he was dealing with. She had fought tooth and nail for everything she had, her career, her independence, her son. And she would be damned if she let some arrogant, power-hungry billionaire decide the course of her life. As soon as she reached her own car, she pulled out her phone and dialed Olivia. "Tell me you didn't kill him," Olivia answered immediately. Kara exhaled sharply. "No, but I might if he tries that again." "What happened?" "He tried to pay me off. $1 million to disappear with Leo and cut Damien out of his life." There was a beat of silence. Then Olivia hissed, "That arrogant, manipulative son of a—" "I know," Kara interrupted, pinching the bridge of her nose. "But it's not over, Liv. Men like him don't give up that easily." "You're right. He'll try something else." And that was the part that scared Kara the most. She had spent years believing Damien had chosen to abandon her. Now she knew he had been forced into it. Would his father try to take Leo away from her? Would he manipulate Damien again? Kara clenched her jaw. No, she wouldn't let that happen. Ever. A storm brewing. That night, after putting Leo to bed, Kara poured herself a glass of wine and sank onto the couch. Her mind raced with possibilities. She needed to get ahead of this. Men like Arthur Hayes didn't threaten. They destroyed. She had seen it before. Corrupt business moguls, ruthless CEOs, people who didn't play fair, who saw the law as just another game to manipulate. Her law degree had prepared her for a lot of battles. But this wasn't just a case. This was her life. Her son's life. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She frowned. It was late. Who ruled? Her chest tightened as she peeked through the peephole. Damien. She debated ignoring him, but something in her gut told her she needed to hear what he had to say. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Damien looked wrecked. His usual polished composure was gone. His tie was loose, his dark hair slightly disheveled. "Kara," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." She crossed her arms. "If this is about your father." "It is." He cut in, his jaw tight. "I found out what he did." Kara's eyebrows lifted slightly. "And?" Damien exhaled sharply, stepping inside. "I confronted him. He admitted it. He said he was handling a problem I was too emotional to see clearly." Kara let out a humorless laugh. "Wow, your father really knows how to charm people, doesn't he?" Damien's expression darkened. "I told him he had no right, that I would fight him if he tried anything else." "And what did he say?" Damien hesitated, and that pause made Kara's stomach twist. "He warned me that if I don't back off, he'll take legal action," Damien admitted, his voice tight with frustration. "He's already having his lawyers dig into your background, looking for any way to challenge custody." Kara's blood ran cold. "He wants to take Leo from me." Damien clenched his fists. "I won't let him." She searched his face, trying to gauge whether he truly meant that. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked finally. "Because this isn't just about me anymore, Kara. It's about Leo. And I need you to know that I'm on your side." She studied him, searching for cracks in his sincerity. Did she believe him? Could she trust him? Finally, she sighed. "If we're going to fight this, I need to know where you stand, Damien. Are you really ready to go against your father?" Damien's eyes were steady. "I already have." The legal war begins. The next morning, Kara sat in her office with Evelyn Grant, one of the most formidable family law attorneys in the country. She had hired Evelyn the moment she realized this wasn't just about keeping Damien out of Leo's life. Now it was about making sure Arthur Hayes never had a chance to interfere. "He's going to come at you hard," Evelyn warned, flipping through a legal pad. "Custody challenges. Character attacks. If he's as powerful as you say, he'll use everything in his arsenal." Kara nodded. "That's why I need to be ready." Evelyn smirked. "Lucky for you, I love a good fight." Before Kara could respond, her phone buzzed. A text. From Damien. "We need to meet. My father made his next move." Kara's grip on the phone tightened. It had begun. And she was ready. The custody war begins. A declaration of war. Kara Thompson had spent years preparing for legal battles, but this one was different. This wasn't just a case. This was her life. This was her son, and she would do whatever it took to protect him. The text from Damien had been brief but urgent. "We need to meet. My father made his next move." She had known this was coming. From the moment Arthur Hayes had tried to buy her silence, she knew he wouldn't stop. But the reality of it hit like a wrecking ball. By the time she arrived at the small private lounge Damien had chosen for their meeting, her mind was already running through every worst-case scenario. Damien was already there, pacing. He looked as exhausted as she felt. The moment he saw her, he slid a thick envelope across the table. She didn't have to open it to know what it was. A custody challenge. Filed by Arthur Hayes. Kara inhaled sharply. How far is he taking this? Damien's jaw tightened. Far. He's claiming that because I'm Leo's biological father, I have a legal right to custody. And since I come from a stable financial and social background, he believes he can prove that Leo would be better off with me. Kara clenched her fists. And what? He expects you to just take Leo from me. Damien exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. That's not what I want, Kara. Then why didn't you stop him? Her voice was sharp, cutting through the dimly lit room. Damien looked at her, his expression raw. Do you think I haven't tried? My father doesn't listen. He doesn't care about Leo. This isn't about him being a good grandfather. This is about control. He lost control of me, so now he's coming after you. Kara swallowed the rage boiling inside her. She had always known Arthur Hayes was ruthless, but going after her son, that was a new level of cruelty. So, what do you want from me, Damien? She asked, crossing her arms. His gaze didn't waver. I want to fight this with you. Kara's breath hitched. She had expected him to side with his father, to take the easy way out, as he had done before. But this time, Damien wasn't running. This time, he was standing with her. I don't trust you, Kara said bluntly. Damien's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't blame you, but this isn't about us anymore. This is about Leo. She wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that he didn't deserve to fight for Leo after being absent for so long. But the truth was, she needed him, because Arthur Hayes was a monster. And monsters didn't stop until they were forced to. Fine, she said, her voice like steel. But if you betray me again, I will make sure you never see Leo again. Damien nodded, his expression solemn. I won't betray you, Kara. Not this time. For Leo's sake, she hoped that was true. The legal chessboard. The next morning, Kara sat across from Evelyn Grant, her attorney, in a sleek conference room at her law firm. Evelyn flipped through the custody filing, letting out a low whistle. Your ex's father really doesn't hold back, does he? Kara sighed. Tell me something I don't know. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. All right. Here's the reality. His legal team is going to argue that Leo belongs in an optimal environment, meaning with his wealthy father and a family name that opens doors. Kara's stomach churned. And our argument? Evelyn smirked. That biology doesn't make a father. You've raised Leo on your own for 3 years. You have a stable home, a successful career, and an unbreakable bond with your son." She flipped a page. "But the real wild card here is Damien." Kara tensed. "What about him?" "If he stands with his father, this case gets ugly. If he stands with you, we have a fighting chance." Kara clenched her jaw. "He says he's on my side." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Do you believe him?" Kara hesitated. Did she? She had spent years hating Damien, resenting his absence, believing he had abandoned her. Now, he claimed he wanted to fight for their son. But could she risk trusting him? Could she risk trusting anyone? Evelyn closed the file. "Either way, we need to be prepared for war." And Kara was more than ready. A father's intentions. That evening, Damien knocked on her apartment door. Kara opened it cautiously, finding him standing there with a bag of takeout and an uncertain expression. "I thought maybe we could talk," he said. She crossed her arms. "About what?" "Leo, us, this fight against my father." Kara studied him for a long moment, then sighed, stepping aside. "Fine. Come in." Damien followed her inside, setting the food on the table. "How's Leo?" "Asleep." Damien exhaled, glancing around her apartment. "You've built a good life for him." She folded her arms. "I didn't have a choice." He looked at her then, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I know." Kara sat down, gesturing for him to get to the point. "What do you want, Damien?" He leaned forward. "To make things right." She let out a dry laugh. "That's not possible." "I have to try," he said firmly. "I failed you before, Kara. I won't fail Leo." For the first time, she saw something real in his eyes. Something that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, Damien Hayes wasn't the same man who had walked away 3 years ago. But trusting him was a risk. And Kara didn't take risks when it came to her son. She took control. "I'll give you a chance," she said finally. "But I'm warning you, Damien. If you mess this up, I will make sure you regret it." Damien nodded. "Fair enough." A long silence stretched between them. Then Kara sighed. "Now tell me you didn't just bring takeout to bribe me into a truce." Damien smirked. It was a strategic peace offering. Kara rolled her eyes but took a bite anyway. And for the first time in years, they sat in the same room without the weight of the past crushing them. But the war with Arthur Hayes was just beginning. And no matter how much she wanted to believe Damien had changed, she knew one thing for certain. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. Not when the future of her son was at stake. The final battle for Leo. A war on 2 fronts. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that felt suffocating. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The polished wooden benches were filled with reporters, onlookers, and members of the elite, many who had ties to Arthur Hayes, waiting to see how this legal battle would play out. Kara sat at the plaintiff's table, her spine straight, her hands clasped in her lap. On her right sat Evelyn Grant, her attorney, and one of the best in the business. To her left, Damien Hayes sat stiffly, his jaw tight, his fists clenching and unclenching under the table. Across from them sat Arthur Hayes. The man looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. Sharp gray suit, a perfectly pressed tie, and a cold, calculating gaze that had destroyed many competitors in the corporate world. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was a courtroom. And Kara wasn't one of his employees he could bully. The judge, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "This hearing is now in session. We are here to determine custody rights concerning the minor child, Leo Thompson Hayes." Kara's stomach clenched. She wasn't afraid of fighting. She was afraid of losing. And Arthur Hayes didn't lose. The testimony that could change everything. The first few hours of the hearing were brutal. Arthur's legal team came prepared, throwing every argument they could at Kara. Miss Thompson, Arthur's lawyer, A smug-looking man in his 50s stood with an air of self-importance. While we acknowledge that you have been the sole provider for Leo these past years, we must ask, how do you expect to provide the same level of stability that his father, Mr. Damien Hayes, and his grandfather, Arthur Hayes, can? Kara's expression remained impassive. Leo has had stability with me since the day he was born. I've raised him, cared for him, supported him emotionally and financially. No one in this courtroom can deny that. The lawyer smiled condescendingly. Yes, but you are a working mother. Your job as a high-profile attorney means long hours and intense stress. Can you honestly say that your career hasn't taken time away from your son? Kara's hands tightened in her lap. Before she could respond, Evelyn leaned forward. Objection, Your Honor. That question implies that a working mother is incapable of providing love and stability. If we're questioning parental fitness based on career obligations, then Mr. Damien Hayes and Mr. Arthur Hayes, who run billion-dollar companies, should be under the same scrutiny. The judge raised an eyebrow. Sustained. Arthur's lawyer cleared his throat, shifting tactics. Miss Thompson, do you deny that Mr. Damien Hayes is the child's biological father? Kara took a deep breath. No, I don't deny that. And do you deny that he has now made efforts to be involved in his child's life? She hesitated. Damien had shown up for Leo these past few months. He had been consistent, present, and genuinely trying. No, she admitted. The lawyer smirked, turning to the judge. Your Honor, we argue that Mr. Hayes should have equal custody rights. If not joint custody, then at least regular visitation rights. Arthur Hayes, sitting beside his lawyer, folded his hands together, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't here to just give Damien visitation rights. He wanted full control. Kara clenched her jaw. It was time to go on the offensive. Arthur Hayes takes the stand. Evelyn stood. We would like to call Mr. Arthur Hayes to the stand. Arthur's lawyer frowned but nodded. Arthur rose from his seat, walking with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. Evelyn paced in front of him, her stilettos clicking against the polished floor. Mr. Hayes, would you say you have Leo's best interest at heart? Arthur gave a thin smile. Of course. And would you say you are a family-oriented man? Family means everything to me. Evelyn stopped walking. Then why did you blackmail your own son into abandoning his child? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Arthur's expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. Evelyn arched an eyebrow. You don't, because we have evidence. She turned toward Damien, who slowly stood and pulled a USB drive from his pocket. My father threatened to ruin Kara's career if I didn't leave her, Damien stated, his voice steady but filled with anger. And I have the recorded phone call to prove it. Arthur's face finally flickered with something. Surprise. The judge gestured toward Evelyn. Play the recording. Evelyn handed the drive to the bailiff, and moments later, Arthur's voice filled the courtroom. Damien, you're being foolish. Walk away from that woman, or I'll make sure she's disbarred before the week is over. You wouldn't. I can, and I will. You think I'd let a nobody like her into this family. If you want a future, you do what I say. Otherwise, she's finished. The courtroom fell into dead silence. Arthur's lawyer paled. Damien stared at his father with open disgust. And Kara. For the first time in this entire case, she saw real panic in Arthur Hayes' eyes. He had lost control. The final verdict. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Hayes, do you deny that this recording is authentic? Arthur's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The judge exhaled sharply. Then I have heard enough. She turned to Damien. Mr. Hayes, while I acknowledge your recent efforts to be present in your son's life, your past abandonment and your father's actions cannot be ignored. Therefore, I am granting full legal and physical custody to Ms. Kara Thompson. A rush of relief filled Kara's chest. The judge wasn't done. Mr. Damien Hayes, you will be granted supervised visitation for the next 6 months. If during that time you prove consistent and responsible, you may petition for joint custody. However, Mr. Arthur Hayes will have no legal access to the child." Arthur's expression darkened, but he remained silent. Kara turned to Damien, expecting anger. Instead, he looked at her with something unexpected. Gratitude. He nodded once. She nodded back. The war was over, and she had won. 1 year later, Kara stood in the park, watching as Leo ran ahead, laughing as Damien chased him. A year had passed since the court battle. Damien had kept his word. He had shown up. He had proved that he wanted to be a father. And slowly, cautiously, Kara had started to let her guard down. Not completely, but enough. As Damien scooped Leo into his arms, spinning him around, he glanced at Kara with a small smile. And for the first time in a long time, Kara didn't feel resentment. She felt peace. Maybe, just maybe, this was how it was always meant to be. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end, but a new beginning.